Today we're going to Tombstone, Arizona by reviewing the Sanborn Fire Insurance Map of 1886. Tombstone is most famous for the shootout at the OK Corral. That happened in 1881, so we'll definitely visit that location on the map, as well as many other famous places, including the Schieffelin Hall, the Birdcage Theater, the Occidental Hotel, Tombstone's Courthouse and Jail, Rotten Row, and the Churches of Tombstone, and even a bowling alley. Okay, so before we visit those places though, through map images and old photos, let's set the stage for what was happening in Tombstone in the 1880s and understand why a city of just 7,000 residents in the middle of Arizona needed an insurance company out of New York City to map out its streets. Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps were created to help insurance companies assess fire risk, and Tombstone had good reason to need this done. In the 1880s, two devastating fires tore through the town, destroying much of its business district. The town of Tombstone was rapidly built, transforming it from a remote mining camp into one of the richest mining towns in the West after silver was discovered in the area in 1877. Many of the buildings were constructed of wood because it was quick and cheap. At the time, there were dozens of saloons, restaurants, gambling halls, and theaters. On June 22, 1881, a massive fire swept through the business district, starting in a saloon on Allen Street. In less than an hour, more than 60 businesses were destroyed. Wooden buildings, tar roofs, and strong winds turned the fire into an inferno. The damage was considerable, and many business owners had no fire insurance, forcing some into bankruptcy. Less than a year later, on May 25, 1882, another blaze started in a Chinese laundry on Tough Nut Street. This second fire was even more destructive, wiping out nearly all of the rebuilt commercial district and causing financial devastation. The Sanborn maps helped insurers and city leaders understand the layouts of structures, building materials, and locations of fire hydrants, which was especially critical in a fire-prone city that was built quickly during a mining boom. I have another video that talks a bit more on the origins of Sanborn maps and the type of information they include. Some of those stories surrounding the Sanborn maps are actually pretty interesting. I'll include a link to that video in the description below. With that background info out of the way, we've got lots of places to visit on our tour of Tombstone, so let's get to it. First, let's go to Schieffelin Hall at 402 East Fremont Street. This hall was built in 1881 by Al Schieffelin, the brother of Tombstone's silver discoverer, Ed Schieffelin. The Schieffelin Hall was the largest adobe structure in the Southwest at the time, which made it an excellent building material to resist fire. The building served as a theater, opera house, and community meeting hall, giving Tombstone citizens access to high culture, even in a remote desert town. Looking at the Sanborn map, this building is shown on page 2. Referring back to the key on page 1, we see this building is 2 stories and made of adobe since it was colored in brown. It has entrances on both Fremont Street and 4th Street. The narrow yellow rectangles on the side of the building are wood frame porches. You can clearly see on the map that Schieffelin Hall was a theater with a stage. The theater part of the building was 1.5 stories and the stage was 2 stories. Based on the map, you can also see this building served as a Masonic hall. Another iconic structure mapped in 1886 was the Birdcage Theater located at 535 East Allen Street. Unlike the refined Schieffelin Hall, the Birdcage ran 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, offering gambling, saloon entertainment, and ladies of the evening who worked in curtain boxes or bird cages suspended along the walls. Visitors included miners, outlaws, and even Wyatt Earp. The Birdcage represented the wild side of Tombstone, which was a stark contrast to the cultural ambitions of Schieffelin Hall. The Sanborn map labeled it as a variety theater. The Birdcage was an adobe building, but unlike the Schieffelin Hall, it was only 1 story. An interesting thing to see on this map is that a livery was next door to the theater. If you've watched some of my other videos, then you've probably heard me talk about stables being shown on Sanborn maps. The difference between stables and liveries is that stables were for a homeowner's own horses, and liveries were horse stables that were privately owned but open for other horse owners to house their horses for a fee. So it would be like a garage at your home versus a parking garage at a shopping center. So by having this horse parking garage close to the theater, it was a good strategy to get more customers to the theater and a great way for the livery owners to make money from those customers. Just one block down the street from the Birdcage Theater was a saloon that had a bowling alley. The Vogan's Saloon was built in 1879 and was founded by James Earp's brother. The bowling alley inside the saloon was the first in Arizona and serves as an example of the wealth in this boomtown in the 1880s. Moving on, we'll go to the Occidental Hotel, which was located along Allen Street. The hotel was built in 1883, so it was only 3 years old at the time of this survey for the Sanborn map. The Occidental offered lodging and dining to visiting mining men and would often host political gatherings and social events. After both the 1881 and 1882 fires, the hotel was rebuilt, but it eventually burned down in 1889 after a third fire and was not rebuilt. The hotel shows up on page 2 of the Sanborn map. The map shows that the hotel housed several businesses, including a jeweler and a barber. Also, I'm going to admit that I had no idea what the word Occidental meant when I was researching this video. It means something that relates to countries of the West. It's the opposite of Oriental, which relates to countries of the East. So if you were like me and didn't know, now you do. Next, we'll look at the Tombstone Courthouse and Jail at 223 East Toughnut Street. The courthouse was built in 1882, so it was just 4 years old here on the map. It was a cross-shaped building with a Victorian architectural style. We see on page 3 of the Sanborn map that the courthouse was 2 stories and was constructed of brick. And so remember that red means brick. The first floor on the courthouse was for the county offices, and the second floor contained a large courtroom. The county jail was in the rear of the building, and you can see there is a jail yard in the back along with a 12-foot high wall. Today, the courthouse is preserved as a state park and a museum. Along 4th Street, between the saloons on Allen Street and the courthouse on Toughnut, was a stretch known as Rotten Row. This was home to the offices of lawyers who specialized in mining law. Tombstone's wealth was tied to silver mines, and disputes over ownership were constant. Claim jumping, water rights conflicts, and disagreements over smelting contracts often ended up in court. Another interesting thing about this map is that the carpenter undertaker was also located on this block. The task of building coffins and managing funerals was often a secondary business for woodworkers and cabinet makers who would undertake the business of burying the dead before the funeral industry became a distinct, specialized profession. During the 1880s, Tombstone had more than just saloons and gunfights, it also had churches. The Catholic Church of the Sacred Heart was located at Safford Street and 6th Street until it was moved to another location in 1946. It was the first church built in Tombstone and served many of the Irish, Mexican, and European immigrant miners who came to work in the silver mines. As shown on page 2 of the Sanborn maps, this church was wood frame. St. Paul's Episcopal Church was completed in 1882 and became the first consecrated Episcopal church in Arizona. This church is shown on page 3 at the corner of Safford and 3rd Street and was 4 years old at the time of the map survey. The map indicates the church was adobe, and looking at images of the map today, it is still mostly adobe. Both of these churches were located inside Tombstone, but were distanced from the tightly packed buildings we see throughout the map, where homes, which were designated by DWG for dwellings, were right next to saloons, stores, and theaters. Okay, so let's get to the OK Corral. This shows up on page 3 of the Sanborn map. The corral faces Allen Street and takes up quite a bit of block 17 on this map. There was a livery and stables, and they sold feed for livestock. There was a carriage house next door, along with a restaurant and a hardware shop. Behind the OK Corral was the City Hall. On October 26, 1881, just 5 years prior to the Sanborn map, was the famous gunfight between the Earp brothers, Doc Holliday, and the Clanton and McLaury brothers. The gunfight lasted only half a minute and left 3 men dead. While movies and pop culture place this fight inside or at the OK Corral itself, the actual gunfight took place in a vacant lot on Fremont Street, just down from the back entrance of the corral. A historian once remarked that the gunfight at the OK Corral sounds way better than the gunfight on the vacant half of Lot 2 at Tombstone City Block 17 between Camillus Fly's boarding house and photography shop and the house owned by William Hardwood. That's a mouthful. So if you want a short way of describing this event and you want to be accurate, You can call it the gunfight near the OK Corral. The 1886 Sanborn map also shows us evidence of Tombstone's Chinese population. On page 3, we see a row of Chinese dwellings and laundries along Fremont Street. On the other side of Lot 16 on Allen Street is another cluster of buildings for Chinese tenants. Lot 2 also shows many Chinese stores and a laundry. The Chinese immigrants arrived in Tombstone in the late 1870s and 80s to flee from poverty and unrest in southern China. They established laundries, restaurants, and small shops, many of which were clustered in a Chinatown near Tough Nut and 3rd Streets, as we saw on page 3 of the map. The Chinese faced discrimination and were often blamed for fires, as in 1882, when the blaze that started in a Chinese laundry destroyed much of the town. The Chinese played a vital role in Tombstone's economy by providing laundry service for the miners' clothes, restaurants, and many of the Chinese people worked in service jobs in the hotels and boarding houses. Even though the map of Tombstone, Arizona in 1886 was only 4 pages, which is small by Sanborn map standards, there were a lot of things going on in the city at that time. After 2 fires nearly wiped out the entire town, the city leaders got smart and started using adobe as a building material instead of wood frame. The fire insurance company sent out surveyors to make maps of the town starting in 1886, then every 3 to 5 years later, until the last map was done in 1931. Well, actually, the last map was drawn in 1909, and in 1931, corrections were made to this map by cutting and pasting over the 1909 images. If you are a real Tombstone fan, I offer canvas wraps and framed prints of this map in my shop. I generally find that most people want 1, 2, or even 3 prints of the city's maps, like my husband and I did. But with this city's map being 4 pages, you could get all 4, and that would make an awesome conversation piece for your wall. I offer a discount at my shop for anyone who signs up for my newsletter, so that's something you can think about. Anyway, I appreciate you joining me on this trip to Tombstone in 1886. As usual, I had a great time researching this video and finding out so many interesting things. These Sanborn maps are so fun to study, especially for nerds like myself. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again as we continue uncovering American history one map at a time. As always, thanks for stopping by.